everyone, and welcome into the Irish NFL show, where I am delighted to be joined by a returning guest, a man who really needs no introduction. He is a legend amongst beat writers. He is from the Atlanta Journal Constitution. Welcome back, D. Orlando Ledbetter. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. Glad to be on the Irish NFL show again, Colin. Really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, I know you were on with Brian not too long ago, but even since then, dear Orlando, there have been a few things. Firstly, I want to congratulate you on the nomination for the Bill Nunn Jr. Memorial Award. I think that there's some serious names on that list, and you certainly deserve to be amongst them.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. No question about it. It's my second time being nominated. Last time I was a younger guy, and they said, "Hey, man, you probably got to wait till you get a little older." So maybe uh, now I'm a little bit older, and maybe if I don't make it this year, maybe I'll get in the next or the year after the next.
Well, you are. You also won Georgia Sports Writer of the Year last year, so and I have seen the respect you rightfully get in the post game press conferences. Everyone knows your name. So fingers crossed for you. But it is great to see you get the recognition you so richly deserve, because your work it's the written word, it's podcasting, it's broadcasting. You truly do it all, and we always appreciate having you on this show. And I suppose, look, there are a number of things we could start with London, but I think if we start maybe with the draft, and one of the things, Orlando, you wrote a piece recently around the way in which teams build their big boards. And for any one who hasn't seen it, I definitely recommend it. Now, you may have to find, because unfortunately, the Atlanta Journal Constitution is geo blocked over here, but there are ways and means, and I would recommend you check out the Orlando's work. But for those who haven't, unfortunately, had the opportunity to check it out, can you talk to us about that piece, and about how teams go about putting their big boards together, the Orlando?
Yes, no question about it. It was a number was thrown out that teams, we're doing all these mock drafts leading up to the draft, but we don't have the resources that the teams have to put together $20 million draft boards. And that caught me off guard that, it costs that much to prepare for the draft. And so I started asking executives, he's like, yeah, that's a real number. There are variances. Some teams spend more than others. Some teams, don't have full time scouts. But when you look at the process starting in the previous, right now, June, the draft meetings are starting down in Florida, and then you carry that all the way through February. We were into February this year, the end of February. That's a lot of time, that's a lot of travel. You got scouts crisscrossing the country. Then you got executives crisscrossing the country, looking at players, meeting coaches, meeting doing background checks. Then you do you investigate at the school, you investigate the family, and then you start ranking the players. Ranking the players on who could play football is probably the easiest part of it. But before you get ready to hand over $20 million to Bijan Robinson, you want to know, what type of player he is. How's he going to handle all that money? Is his family going to get in the way? Has he had is it a good church going family, or they had a bunch of criminals in the family? They're going to look at all that stuff and try to determine, hey, we're going to make the call on this guy here over this guy. And we had, that scenario play out here where they decided to pick Bijan Robinson over Jalen Carter. Now, football talent wise, Carter projects to be a bigger impact possible player, but he's already run into problems since post draft, posing in gang uniforms and so forth, alleged gang uniforms. And he already had problems at Georgia. So, you got to watch who you're bringing in. And they spend a lot of money in doing that to make sure they have the right guys on their football teams.
And I suppose in terms of that decision to go with Bijan, now you've kind of outlined there the decision, around the character, and that is something like different teams will approach it in different ways. But there had been, I suppose, a lot of speculation about what the Falcons were going to do. And maybe early on in the process, the speculation online, let's say, was that they might look
Mhm.
potentially at one of the cornerbacks. Ultimately, they decide to go with Bijan. How were they always honed in on that pick, the Orlando, or can you give us kind of how the Falcons ultimately decided to settle on him?
Yeah, they had a pod of players for their pick at 8. This was one of the most unpredictable drafts in front of them at 7. So if a pass rusher got to them, they would have taken him. That would have been Tyrese Wilson because Will Anderson wasn't getting to him. So, but they didn't view those guys as uh, impact enough players to trade up and go get them. So they set at 8. And when by the time it gets to them at 8, you got Bijan, Jalen Carter, uh, Lucas Van Ness, and you got Christian Gonzalez as a cornerback. And so, those were probably 4 in that pod. Jalen Carter, they didn't want him. Christian Gonzalez had some concerns about his toughness, and Lucas Van Ness was too high in their mind to take at 8. So the better player on their board was Bijan Robinson. And so they went on and turned the name in there. Van Ness goes a few picks later to Green Bay. Carter goes on the very next pick, and Gonzalez hangs around a little while and goes, I think, 17th overall. So that's how their board came down. He was one of the guys we had in our 5 players to watch on the Falcons' radar. We didn't think Wilson would slip to him, but we thought they would stick with their need and take Van Ness. They chose not to take Van Ness and develop the guys they have with the veterans they signed in free agency, and then they went Zach Harrison in the 3rd round at defensive end.
Yeah, I suppose delving a little into that, the rest of the draft, because certainly, you saw some teams who really went, all offense. I think that the Titans might have gone down that route, but for the Falcons, it was quite a mixed bag. You went, it was like running back, tackle, edge, cornerback, safety, guard. So they really went all over the field. And I suppose, what was that a very conscious decision that they were looking at both sides of the ball, or was it the way that the draft just fell to them, the Orlando?
Yeah, it was the way the draft fell to him, Column. They're our best player available team, so they never want to reach for needs. And so I've studied that with Ron Wolf in Green Bay when my time with the Packers, and everybody's followed Ozzie Newsome in Baltimore. And that they's like, hey, draft the best guy, and we get the best players in here, and then we're gonna beat all the teams that have been drafting these guys aren't as good. They've been reaching for, and we're gonna have better players on the field. They know it's about players. So the Falcons stayed with that, and they actually traded up to get the left guard, Troy Bergeron. So that was a need and a trade up. And then they got Zach Harrison in the 3rd round, who's a kid that if he might have went back to Ohio State, maybe he's a first rounder next year. So he's got potential. He can learn from Calais Campbell and David Onyemata. And then in the 4th round, they get Clark Phillips, a little tough cornerback who, some people thought was a first rounder, but speed and agility didn't make him one. He lasted to the 4th. You can play him in the slot. And then the 7th round guys, you got DeMarco Hollums from Alabama, a strong side boundary corner who can play on special teams for you. Don't put him in the deep middle; he's gonna get beat. And then you got Jovan Gwynn from South Carolina, They've been following this kid for 5 years. He played at Harding. They tried to get him. Coach Ledford tried to get him at North Carolina State when he was coming out of Charlotte, North Carolina. He ends up playing and having a nice career at South Carolina at guard, but they think they can make him a center. And so in the seventh round, seventh rounders don't make it much. I did a little work here today. The last seventh rounder from the Falcons to make it was Vince Walker in 2009. And Vince went on, he's from Georgia Tech, went on to play 132 games, get him a Super Bowl ring with the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50. So all the seventh round picks since haven't made it. And, you're just hoping you can get somebody that can maybe make your team and contribute in some kind of way. And that usually starts on special teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you kind of get down to the later rounds, you are rolling the dice, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you were obviously at the rookie mini camps, and I suppose, look, all eyes are going to be on Bijan. And what are your expectations for him, and how the Falcons will look to utilize his talent?
Yeah, just based on the information that we've got, talking from the Falcons, seeing them, and his old coach is one of the former Falcons here, Steve Sarkisian. So he used him in the slot, and that's intriguing to Arthur Smith because you want to try to create mismatches with the linebackers, kind of how the Saints did for years against the Falcons. I'm talking about Darren Sproles, Reggie Bush, Alvin Kamara. So now the Falcons have their own kind of Alvin Kamara, Reggie Bush, uh, smaller running back to create mismatches with. Sorry about that. And that's how I see him. I don't see him as a 25 carry, old school Eric Dickerson back, where he's gonna running at people all day. But he can definitely hurt you on third downs and break the big play. And they've called him a home run hitter. So with that comes a lot of expectations.
Yeah, and I suppose kind of moving in terms of the expectations, because that brings to mind Kyle Pitts, right? And that's a player obviously talked about, generational talent, but it is a position, tight end, where players really struggle to transition into the league. I mean, the league has changed. We have seen cornerbacks, young cornerbacks are superstars early. Wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase hit the ground running. Even young QBs all are able to transition. But tight end is still an area where it takes time. Are the expectations that year three, and given the talent in the offense with Bijan, with Drake London, I know there are questions still around the quarterback, and what will happen, like I suppose what we'll see on the field ultimately from Desmond Ritter. But are there expectations amongst the fan base that this will be a breakout year for Kyle Pitts?
Yes, it is. And they can base that on the fact that he was healthy as a rookie, almost had 1,000 yards. But they changed the quarterback. Matt Ryan knew how to use him. Desmond Ritter, we'll see. But there were times last year where he was wide open and Marcus Mariota couldn't get him the ball. And so this year, Desmond Ritter, the big question will be if the Falcons are going to have a balanced attack. Desmond Ritter's gonna have to be able to get the ball to Kyle Pitts, and it's all gonna start there. It's not gonna end there because he can get it to Drake London also, but it's definitely gonna be a start to the Falcons' improvement on offenses. Can Desmond Ritter get the ball to Kyle Pitts?
And I suppose if we move to the London trip, because the Falcons are a team where it seems like the Falcons owner, Arthur Blank, is very committed to the global growth of the game. I mean, you go back to the COVID year, and I know that the Falcons were scheduled to play my Broncos. I know you've been over to London for the Falcons. In terms of, I suppose, Arthur Blank and the Falcons, the franchise clearly enjoys coming over to this side of the Atlantic. What about the players, the Orlando?
Yeah, no, the players enjoyed it. I certainly, I've been there, what, 11 and then 21. So a lot of the players changed in the interim. But I know Matt Ryan and Calvin Johnson, who came over with Detroit, I know they enjoyed the game. The crowds were a little bit different, a lot more knowledgeable 10 years later when that game is the Jets and the Falcons, and they get a close game at the end. Kyle Pitts breaks loose for 100, fans are more knowledgeable and they're not just doing random waves and cheering random stuff. So you've definitely seen the game grow in London and in Europe to the point where you're also playing in Germany now. But yeah, the knowledge of the fans has been the one thing that's most impressive, and the players, they don't. It's a longer plane flight, but the teams they travel in class, and so it's not like they're on one of the other airlines and so forth. But the players, the feedback has been all positive, and it's always good to expand your horizons. So I haven't heard anything negative from the players from either of the trips.
And I suppose then, if we look to that game against the Jags, because the Jags, I suppose, are a team who have invested, even more the Falcons more than anyone in terms of trying to build up that fan base in the UK, and I mean, not that the Falcons will have to worry about it, but the Jags are committed to playing two games back to back, so a home game and a road game in London this year. In terms, I suppose, of where the teams are at, because last year London changed the season for the Jags in a weird way. They ended up losing that game to the Broncos, but Trevor Lawrence walks away afterwards and said that it really made him reflect. He thought about his game. He wanted to be more deliberate. He threw a couple of interceptions, one right on the goal line to Justin Simmons. It was kind of a sliding doors moment, because if the Broncos lose that, Nathaniel Hackett gets the sack. But that doesn't happen. But then Trevor Lawrence emerges and has a great kind of back end of the season. They make the playoffs. They come back from 27 down against the Chargers. They acquit themselves pretty well, you'd have to say, on the road in Arrowhead, when most people didn't give them a prayer. They're now going into a second season with Doug Pederson, very capable coach following what went on. What are I suppose, your thoughts on facing a Jaguars team who are kind of the favorites for the AFC South?
Yeah, the Jaguars are, one of the better teams. The Falcons will play next year. Them and the Vikings and the Bucks are the teams that went to the playoffs last year that the Falcons will play. So this game will mark a big early test for the Atlanta Falcons. Fourth game of the season. They will have been to Detroit. They will have played. Let me look at the other part of the schedule. They got to play Detroit, open with New Orleans, open with the Panthers, right? Let me just get that right here for you, Colin. We got
Yeah,
yeah,
you got
Carolina,
the
Green Bay, Detroit. So yeah, they might be 2-2. So coming over there, um, that's gonna be a big test for them because they'll be coming off the Detroit game against a Detroit team that really is physical and came on strong last year. So a lot of people expect them to lose that. So this will be one where they'll be trying not to go down to maybe 2-2. And Trevor Lawrence is from Georgia. He's Rome, Georgia kid. And this also will be a big game because Calvin Ridley didn't come with the Falcons last time. That's when he had mental health issues, and he's since been traded to the Jaguars. So Calvin Ridley against the Falcons will be a good story. And Trevor Lawrence, they'll get to test Desmond Ridder against a playoff bound team. And that's coming off of the AFC South Championship.
Are you at all surprised, the Orlando, that after that game in London, they head straight back? They're not taking their bye. and they're going straight in. They're playing the Texans, the Commanders, and the Bucks are the three games following that. Now, at least on paper, those are probably three winnable games. Do you think that factored into the decision? Because usually teams get a choice. They can take a bye if they want, but they ultimately get the decision. And the Falcons won't have their bye as a result until much later in November. So it's going to be what, like about 5, 6 weeks after they get back before they have the bye.
Yeah, 6 weeks after they did a little research on their own column and thought they, you don't really want a bye week in the fifth week of the season. Then you got 12 to go. That's you ideally want it right in the middle. So they ended up with a bye after 10 games. So then you have 7 to go. So you get to 10 games. Maybe you're 7-3, and you keep it going. But the research that they pointed to was the fact that teams that did not take the bye are 9-1 when they come back and play that week. Players are such creatures of habit. They get in that routine. You want to keep it going, and so they decide to keep it going and take the later bye week in the season. So the only team to lose after coming back and playing after the bye week was Miami, and that was to the Falcons a couple years ago down there in Miami Gardens. So 9-1 after playing in London with no bye week, and so that's what they elected to do this time.
So a data-driven decision, which makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. If we look at the rest of the NFC South, kind of following the draft, and I suppose the Panthers, that was like we knew that was a QB, and realistically, we
hmm
probably knew for about a month beforehand, if not more, that it was going to be
hmm
Bryce Young. The Saints obviously have brought in Derek Carr, and we'll have to see how that goes. You would have to feel that's probably an upgrade, a guy who ultimately, um, due to a number of factors, it just never worked in Las Vegas. But in fairness to him, he showed considerable leadership, especially a couple of years ago during the Gruden season and Henry Ruggs. I mean, he was the only thing holding them together, it felt. But the Bucks, it feels like they're kind of in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. So when you look at the Falcons and where they're at, the Orlando, following the draft and the talent that they have brought in, is the expectation that really they should be fighting it out with the Saints, like at least on paper, as potential divisional winners?
Yes, no question about it. Derek Carr, his record with the Raiders through a bunch of tumultuous years, several coordinators and coaches, 63-79. So no wins in the playoffs. So you're not talking about Tom Brady coming to the Bucks or Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets here. So, but he was drafted by Dennis Allen. They do like him, and they know what he can do. Once you start putting too much on his plate, it doesn't go well. So, he's by far the best quarterback in the league right now in the division. So they're going to be the contenders. They're going to be the preseason favorites. Now for the Falcons, if everything goes right, nobody gets hurt and they play solid, and these free agents gel together because you have a lot of variables coming together. Then they'll have a shot to play against the Saints for the division title. The schedule's their friend this year. It's the softest schedule in the league with the 417 win percentage. It's spaced out perfectly. And our columnist here at the Atlanta Journal Constitution, Mark Bradley, made a fine point where he said, "Hey, all Desmond Ritter has to do is play competent football. He's got enough around him to where all he's got to do is hand the ball off and, once people come up to stop the run, find a safety, throw it to the other side." And I've seen that formula work before. When the Falcons had Matt Ryan as a rookie, he handed the ball off to Jarius Norwood and Michael Turner. They ran for 2,000 yards. And when teams tried to come up and stop him, he threw it. He found Roddy White and Michael Jenkins up the sidelines. So not real hard or complex football the Falcons gonna have to play this year. But Ritter's got to be able to find the safety and throw the ball where away from the safety.
And I suppose I'm wondering, like, is it a good job that the Falcons have those, exciting young weapons on offense? Because otherwise, in the state, might people begin to look north towards Pennsylvania because the Eagles have made themselves, given their picks over the last two drafts, they have become kind of Georgia light, right?
Yes, no doubt. Howie Roseman has drafted the Bulldogs in mass. He's trying to recreate the national championship defense up there, and that's made a lot of the Athens fans, in Georgia country, made them Eagle fans. So they want to see the Bulldogs do well. Nobody down here doesn't want to see them do well. They would have preferred them to do well for the Falcons, but for some reason, and this is a fact that came up during the draft in our research, is that the Falcons have never drafted a player from the University of Georgia in the first round since 1966. It's something there, something about being close to campus and your fun zone where, they want you to turn professional and treat it like a job. And they definitely didn't want to take that gamble with Jalen Carter. Now, they did do it with Keith Brooking, I believe it was 1998, where he was drafted out of Georgia Tech and he lived in Coweta County, southern suburb of Atlanta, and it worked out fine for him. He had a good career here with the Atlanta Falcons. So, the Bulldog fans will be Eagles fans, and the Falcons will try to win a Super Bowl here eventually without too many players from the University of Georgia.
And maybe finally, Diolana, because I think one of the pieces that you did, and I thought would be interesting just to touch on, was around the Steelers, and you said that maybe the Falcons should look to the Steelers because the Steelers organization and Magical Mike Tomlin, they know how to draft and they know how to win.
Yeah, no doubt. And it goes back goes back to Chuck Noll and Bill Nunn. Thank God I'm a nominee for his award. He was one of the great scouts of the HBCUs that helped to put together the backbone of the Steel Curtain, recruiting the SWAC conference and the MEAC, CIAA, SIAC schools for the Pittsburgh Courier. He was a sports writer, and they brought him on part time as a scout, and he eventually turned into a full time scout. Second career, Mr. Bill Nunn, as a scout for Chuck Noll and that original group. And they carried that on through the various GMs. They now have a new GM, but the system's in place to where they draft well every year to the point that they haven't had a losing season since 2002. So, I mean, that's 20 straight years of winning seasons. You're always in the hunt. You got Super Bowl titles to show for it. I don't understand why people try to create these new models when you have a championship model out there like the Steelers that's consistent, and they talk about sustaining winning, but they do it, they don't do it the way the Steelers do. They making these collaborative mishmash uh, uh, flow charts and so forth. Instead of, hey, the Steelers, the PR people pick the personnel people pick the players, the coaches give them a little input, and the coaches coach the football team. So, I think everybody could copy the Pittsburgh Steelers and do themselves a favor.
Yeah, I think lots to learn from that organization, certainly. Dear Orlando, you are a fantastic follow on Twitter. I cannot recommend highly enough people check you out. The Bowtie Chronicles is a fantastic podcast. If there are people who are listening who aren't familiar with your work, where is the best place for them to find that?
Yeah, whether or not geo blocked, our website is ajc.com. We're on Facebook under Atlanta Falcons News Now, and then on Twitter, my Twitter name is at DOrlandoAJC, and we tweet out all the stories on those various platforms.
Well, we'll make sure to put your Twitter handle into the show notes. And I just want to say thank you once again and to wish you continued success in your career and look forward to seeing you in London.
All right. Thank you so much, Colin. I look forward to seeing you. Also, thanks for having me today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into today's Irish NFL show with me, Colm Cronin. And I am delighted to be joined by a sports anchor, reporter, storyteller, a ridiculously talented lady who covers the Jacksonville Jaguars, Mia O'Brien. Welcome to the Irish NFL show.
Well, thank you for that glowing introduction. These days, I think they just call me Radio Hack, but I do all those things still, even now, transitioning from full-time TV, still doing TV, but on a freelance basis, and then full-time at 1010XL doing radio, and then also overseeing all of our multimedia production, like you alluded to.
Yeah, you juggle, you wear many hats and you've
Very
got
much
lots
so.
of different things. So kudos for that. But I suppose I am intrigued because you used the word storyteller yourself. And I had mentioned to you that, you know, we are a nation of storytellers on this little green island. And I had the good fortune to talk to Jim Trotter just a couple of weeks ago. And Jim describes himself as a storyteller. And I suppose before we delve into anything in the NFL side of things, in terms of your own career, Mia, you know, was this was reporting, journalism, was that something you always, storytelling, was that something that you always wanted to get into? What's the genesis of it?
Yeah, tremendous question. The first answer I usually give people is how I got into this crazy business. And I usually share this with young reporters, young sports personalities coming up, which is that I am the exception. I was very fortunate that Ian Eagle used to host a sports broadcasting camp back when I was in high school. He has since kind of stepped more into a, what do you call it? When he's like he's still involved, but he doesn't run the camp anymore. But Bruce Beck of NBC New York also still very active and still runs the camp. And he was the co-director back when I was in high school. And so I was very blessed that at a young age, at 15 years old, I go to this camp. There's 52 students. 46 of them are men. I'm one of 6 girls. And I just so happened to be one of the 2 students that they plucked out of that 52 and said, hey, you're going to do a live read with NBA TV and you can do this. And to be told that at 15 years old and to then be told, you're going to go to Syracuse or Ithaca. You're going to go to Montana, Alpena, Michigan, Bangor, Maine. You're going to go somewhere far away for 2 years. Then you're going to move up to Market 80. Then you're going to move to Market 20. And then you're going to move to ESPN. And that's the way your life is going to go for the next decade plus. That doesn't really happen. It also doesn't actually happen in our world, which has become much more horizontal when it comes to the media landscape as opposed to being so vertical like that with the adventation of podcasts, with entities like 1010XL, my current employer, where it's a terrestrial radio station, but they focus so heavily on the multimedia side with the Barstools, the Ringer, etc. To your point, storytelling is a big part of why our media landscape has become so horizontal like that. And it's something that I, fortunately, because I prided myself in that for so long, kind of has been a feather in my cap. And it's what it allowed for this job that I now have to be created. And so I attribute a lot of that to my first, quote unquote, on air job, if you may. We may or may not have lied on the resume with this one a couple of times. So I was going into my senior year at Ithaca, and I had already had 6 or 7 internships at that point. So I'm like, I'm over the internship thing. I want to actually do this thing for real. And so I was very lucky, number one, that my director of television radio at Ithaca College, Pete Johan, said, why are you applying to ESPN and Fox Sports as a production assistant intern? Why do you want to be cutting video? Don't you want to be on air 5 years from now? And I said, yes. And so he said, I want you to write a handwritten note to every TV station within 35 minutes of Ithaca, an hour of your hometown in New Jersey, an hour of your parents' Pocono house, and see if anything sticks. And I was very fortunate that Andy Molnowski in Elmira, New York, right down the road from Ithaca, not only responded, but said, I will put you on the air. You will be our third reporter. And so what was really instrumental to bring this full circle to the storytelling aspect that summer is that Andy attacks storytelling with the same fervor and passion he could be doing a story on a little league kid, and he is attacking that with the same energy as he is when Elmira and Watkins Glen host NASCAR each and every summer. Like he's talking to Kyle Busch, and he is giving the same and attention respect to the little 9-year-old down the street and telling his story the same way as he would tell the story of Kyle Busch winning at Watkins Glen. And that was huge for me, because when you get sent to these small little towns, you're like, where do I find stories if there's no NFL team, if there's no Major League Baseball team? And Andy proved to me that you can always find stories, and sometimes those are the best stories. And so when I first moved to, thankfully not Montana, no offense to Montana, or Alpena, Michigan, I moved to Iowa. That was something that was really critical, not just for me developing as a storyteller, but also that my bosses out there said, hey, like, highlights are great. Standing up on your pulpit anchoring is great, but we really want to hear the stories of these student athletes, these high school student athletes that mom and dad watching at home, that's who they want to see. They don't need to hear about how many points the Bulls scored or how many runs the Yankees scored. Like, they want to hear that. And so in local television, it was extremely important. And so even now, as I've branched over to a much more larger market in Jacksonville, but also now to the multimedia side of things, it's always at the forefront of what I do and always at the forefront of our media creation here at 1010XL.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really interesting to hear the journey and to hear the inspirations and the serendipity that's involved in anyone's journey. I suppose kind of because you mentioned in terms of, I can't remember the exact percentage, but the girls at the camp were outnumbered. And,
oh, yes.
We are seeing a media landscape change, but change can be slow. Some might describe it as glacial. But you are one of the co-hosts on Helmets and Heels.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell me and our listeners and viewers a little bit, I suppose, about that? Because I think it's interesting to hear that, because very often, we've moved away from maybe manels as they're described now, but very often, it is just a gender balance in terms of hosting. But that isn't the case, obviously, with Helmets and Heels.
Yes, it is the longest running, I believe it was the first ever in a NFL market, all-female sports radio show. So we do it every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. Even if you're not in the Jacksonville area, you can listen on the 1010XL app and at 1010XL.com. And obviously, we talk sports. We dive a little bit more into the lifestyle. If anything, I'll tell you this, like, we feel like we don't even lean into that as much these days because we are so focused on the sports. But the reality is that we present, and we are presenting from a different viewpoint than the other 12 hours of live programming that goes on our station each and every day. And while myself and Lauren Brooks also team up with some of our male counterparts and have daily shows, you don't get to hear from 3 women on the air any other time during the week in Jacksonville. And you really don't get to hear from 3 women on a daily basis in any other NFL market going right now. And so it's a super innovative, super forward thinking ideal that our general manager, Steve Griffin, put forth, back in, I was still in college when they debuted. I think it was like 2015 or 2014 or something like that. Jacksonville was a glimmer in my eye when they first debuted Helmets and Heels, and it's still running, and it's an honor to follow in those footsteps. And yeah, for me, going to the camp and having that experience, for better or worse, I was always okay with being one of the guys because that is what I was forced to be when I was at camp. And it wasn't like I was trying to seek their approval. It was just simply, well, if you're going to have friends, like, they're all guys. And so I was never intimidated by that. And if anything, I pushed back against feminism because I was like, look, like, I've earned what I've gotten just as much as my male counterparts have. And I think it's been in recent years, and especially through my role at 1010, that I've seen it's not so much about banging your chest and saying women power. It's more so about, hey, you doing what you're doing and earning your keep is saying to someone behind you in line that this is possible. And you should, as out of respect for the people that came before you, be reaching back and ensuring that they know that not only they can make it, but that you are willing to help them put in the work and get there as well.
Yeah, and I think, like, representation matters until such time as it becomes the norm. And I think, given, say, the Jalen Hurts situation and his new contract and the fact that it's an all-female management team, I mean, that matters right now because it's unusual, but hopefully in 2-3 years' time, we're not even talking about that. But obviously, when it is unusual, it's still going to be something that is discussed, and obviously in its topic, that I would have got into with Jim, because those are issues within the NFL. Again, change happens, but it's about it happening, I suppose, at all levels of the sport, and even at the ownership level, and something that again, we're seeing change, but it is slow. And from when you kind of begin, Mia, like, have you seen change? Does it, does it, and I know you said you went against it initially, but does it feel like, because we see some is it more than just window dressing, I suppose, is my question.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think part of why I pushed back, and now I absolutely adore her. And I think a lot of that has to do with her own life experience the last few years and what she's endured. But for me growing up, when I said I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, the instant reply from a stranger was, "Oh, like Erin Andrews." No, I'm not blonde. And while I certainly would like to be on NFL sidelines, like, that isn't what I'm boxing myself into. I think that, and I don't have a relationship with Erin, although if she's listening, big fan. I think that, at least from my vantage point, what she went through with the unfortunate situation with the stalker, very scary. I think that she kind of found herself a little bit, and you hear it with her podcast she does with Carissa Thompson, which I listen to like every week. We Need to Calm Down, like the Calm Down podcast. Like, I think the big thing with them is that they've had these life experiences, whether it is the unfortunate situation of a stalker or just being the one girl at the boys' table. And they've also recognized, both her and Carissa, that 10, 15 years ago, they're the blonde girl on the sideline. It's not even the girl at the table, the de facto girl. They're the blonde girl on the sideline. And they have pushed back on that by leaning into who they are in here. And so you hear so much more in that podcast, and even on her social media, with who Erin is. She's been so transparent with regards to her search for fertility, her and her husband's struggles to get pregnant. And that's a side that, if you had told a 15-year-old me in 2008 that, like, Erin Andrews is like having those conversations and like wants you to know about her, not just she's propped up in the corner as the blonde sports reporter on the sideline, I wouldn't have believed you. And I think that's why I pushed back, because I'm more like her, like who she actually is and who we now are seeing her to be. And I think that in turn, because she is the most prominent name, I think it's safe to say, when you think of the NFL and women in the NFL, and at least on the media side of things. And so when she does that, you see the Diana Rossinis of the world that like to have fun on social media. You see that they'll take like a Kim Martin, who was a beat writer and a very good beat writer at that, and say, hey, let's create a space for you on air at ESPN. And I think on the PR side as well, we're seeing more women getting involved for the 32 league teams. And I think that because those women, again, like I said, I think because those women saw the opportunity they were given and said, how can we make it better? And they were vulnerable enough to share their story and to be their authentic selves, it in turn has turned around. And it's no longer, like I said, about burning your bra to be a feminist. Like, it's like, hey, it's cool that she's on, doing the job that I want to do, but it's even cooler that she like is the same person on and off the field. And I think that you are seeing more of that in the NFL in particular.
Okay, well, that's good. That's progress.
Yes.
Look, I couldn't have you on the Irish NFL show without asking, given the surname, do you have Irish heritage? Have you ever been to this little green island?
I have only been once. I actually studied abroad in the UK at the Ithaca College London Center in 2013. Your listeners will get a kick out of me, of course, being the brilliant 20-year-old I was. I say, hey, why don't we go to Ireland during St. Patrick's Day, and we're going to go to Dublin, and we're going to do it big, and all of our friends that we're visiting for spring break are going to come with us too. And so we had, I think, about like 20 of us crammed into like 2 hotel rooms right outside of city center. And it's unfortunate because now I look back on it, and my sister had the opportunity to study abroad, and she went to Galway. She did the countryside, much more where our ancestors are from. We're Cook County. Cork, County Cork. Yes, that's where our ancestors are from. But no, my dad's 100% Irish, and I look forward to hopefully getting back there because my boyfriend's family is also very Irish. His mom actually lived over there for a little bit, and so hopefully going to be getting back there in the next few years because I need to experience real Ireland, not the whatever I thought. Oh yeah, at 20 would be fun on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, it is fun, but I think there's a lot more to, as your sister will have told you, there's a lot more to Ireland than just Dublin and Cork. I mean, I'm biased because I'm from Cork originally. Cork is an absolutely beautiful part of the country, but yeah, I would encourage you come back, get out west. It's phenomenal to see, and the team, the Jags, will be over this part of the world. I suppose that we now know what the team president had hinted that this was coming, but the announcement of 2 games, I suppose, in terms of what how are or have the players even thought of it? Because we sometimes hear, I remember having the opportunity to talk to Leonard Fournette, and he talked about getting on the plane and just it seeming like an eternity for him, and kind of trying to deal with the jet lag and the time difference. And I'm also conscious, that you've got fans over there who, this is a big deal. You only get 17 games in the season, and I know they're not both home games, but by the same token, it is 2 games out of 17 that the Jags will be playing on international soil. There's a lot of excitement, I would say, amongst people in the UK about this. What's the feeling in Jacksonville?
Yeah. So the funny part is, if you go back 3 years ago, which no one on planet Earth wants to go back to 2020, but shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic began, the Jaguars had announced intentions to play 2 games that were both home games in London. And there was a huge outroar. And then obviously, if there was one good thing that came from the pandemic, the Jags got bailed out from that PR nightmare because no international games that upcoming season just because of the nature of the pandemic. And so we didn't hear anything about the 2 games for a while. This 2-game schedule with the Jags, I probably heard about it about a month and a half ago, I want to say now. And while I wasn't surprised, I mean, obviously I was taken aback a little bit, but then when I heard it's a home, it's an away, and it's also, it's about testing it out, but it's also about, hey, you could either go to Buffalo or you could go to the UK. And also, you're going to get it done early enough in the season in October where it's not going to be right. You're not going to have your bye the week immediately after that second game. There were enough selling points that I think Jaguar fans were able to get on board with the notion. The biggest, of course, being that it is a home and an away game. And as someone who spends a lot of time in central New York, while I do love visiting there in October, and that would have been very nice, you would not want to go there in December, especially with that Bills Mafia. So I think a lot of Jaguar fans just view it exactly as that. They have a 2-week road trip, and they have 2 road games in a row, at least from the notion of people who don't leave Jacksonville to go watch Jaguar games. I think that the reception has been better than they anticipated. Of course, the other big can of worms is that TIAA Bank Field's lease with the Jaguars ends in 2030. There, of course, need to be restorations done because it is going to be, once the Buffalo Bills open their stadium, the oldest stadium, and Nashville and the Tennessee Titans open their new one. TIAA Bank Field will be the oldest stadium without renovations in the National Football League. And so that is an uphill battle that the city knows is also around the corner. And a lot of fans are fearful that if this 2-game series is a success for the Jaguars, could they potentially, if only during the renovations of TIAA Bank Field, could they go across the pond for an even longer period of time for more games? I don't see that happening, even with, the notion of Shad Khan. The NFL owners may only want him to pay 40%, like Nashville's situation where the taxpayers are paying 60% and the Titans ownership is paying 40%. Ditto to up in Buffalo with the Pagula family. And so I think that there is a little bit of internal concern just because of the history and national media that love to say the Jaguars are moving to London. But all things considered, it's been much better received this time around than it was in 2020.
Yeah, well, it's not the home. It's interesting. I had Stevie Howland, who goes by at Irish Jaguar on
Mhm.
Twitter, and Stevie was talking about that in about 2020. And for him, he actually loves the opportunity to get stateside because it's it's far. The atmosphere, the London games are still, and the international games, it's not a home game for any team because
Right.
ultimately you're getting lots of their for Jaguars fans stateside. I think there's the NFL and the commissioner talk a good game about like having divisions or teams over here. There would be so many obstacles to overcome in terms of tax, in terms of like getting players to agree to it.
Mhm.
It's all very well being away for 2, 3, even 4 weeks, but ultimately half a season. And imagine how trades would work. Imagine
Well, I
you're
mean, just like, yeah, imagine if you say to your wife and your family, like, all right, I'm signing with this team, so we got to move to Europe now. Like, it's one thing to say we got to move to Seattle or Los Angeles, but to literally be like, yeah, we got to move to a different country. I understand people outside of football. I know I have a good buddy of mine who literally did that, but he was at the time, like, he had a girlfriend who has since followed him and now they're engaged, but they were also in their early 30s and not married and didn't have children. I can't imagine being in the situation where you have a whole family and you have to say, yep, sorry, we got to go over here now. Or you're going to stay here and raise the kids while I go across the pond and maybe I'll see you on road trips.
Yeah, that would take some explaining, and for it to be overnight. Like one day you're in the bay, and then you get told you got to hop on a plane, buddy, because you're going to be starting on Sunday in London. But London also brings up, I suppose, the Jags season turned around last year after losing in London because I was there for that game against the Broncos. The first half, the Jags looked really good and then came out absolutely flat in that third quarter. Trevor Lawrence had a bit of a nightmare. He talked about essentially Justin Simmons turned his season around because he went way, reflected on it. In terms of where the Jags are at now, Mia, there was the Urban Meyer debacle, right? And then Dougie P comes in last year. We see the second half of the season, Trevor Lawrence really begins to look like one of the better QBs in the AFC, which is pretty competitive QB conference. But now you're got the Jags who people are saying, I think pretty much across the board consensus favorites, and that changes things because all of a sudden there's the weight of expectation, and what is that like a couple of years on from just abject dumpster
You
fire?
back to back number one overall picks. Yeah, it's definitely something that takes getting used to. I'm glad you brought up that Broncos game because if you had told anyone who was in that stadium at Wembley or anyone who was watching the game back here that the season would then play out the way it did, I don't know anyone on earth that would have said, yeah, that's exactly how it's going to go. Like they're going to turn it around and everything's going to be great. I was actually reflecting ahead of this interview on the fact that I start getting texts as soon as the game is over about Christian Kirk called out Trevor in the locker room and Marvin Jones and that, not calling out, but they said he's got to start, figuring it out. And then I hear that, at the airport, Trevor sat off in a corner with his wife, just kind of reflecting on everything. And I remember we're all like, and it sounds so awful, but because the first 4 years of covering this team, from my vantage point, all we covered was chaos. And so I'm just like bracing myself for, all right, now we got to deal with this and the bus talk and this, that, and the other. And for Doug Peterson to be as even keel as he is, I think that has played a tremendous part in Trevor's success. And for Trevor to say, hey, let me reset. Let me say, what am I going to do differently? How am I going to move differently? I'm not going to reinvent the wheel in a week, but what do I need to do to lock in more? What do I need to do to execute the playbook? And maybe not take as many chances like he did with that interception at the goal line in London. I think that it speaks worlds of lest we forget, 23-year-old man, because that's Trevor Lawrence does not turn 24 until October. I think I need to everyone needs to remind themselves that. I do it daily because I'm just like, how are you 23? Like at 23, I don't even want to get into it. I was doing the debauchery out in Iowa. And so that's where it is truly incredible. And, when we look back on it, and I know longtime Jaguar fans look back on the 96 season, the second season of the team, and they look back at that like it was a fairy tale. It was a movie. People look at 2017 a little bit like a, different type of movie. They will certainly look back at this one, independent of what happens this upcoming season. It was a movie. Like when they did the schedule release and the script and the players and everything, the Jaguars staff, which did an amazing job, their video team did, and they put together with Asher Grodman from CBS, like it was a movie. Like, I mean, I'm texting people in the stadium when they're down 27-0 against the Chargers. And I'm like, well, I guess I can do the play-by-play for University of North Florida next week because I'm not going to Kansas City. And all of a sudden, 2 hours later, it's like, oh, no, yeah, nope, you're getting on the plane. You're going next week. Sorry, can't do that game. It was truly an experience like nothing else. And I had the pleasure of covering Iowa's 12-0 magical season back in 2015 that ended in the Rose Bowl. I was in the Midwest when the Cubs broke a 108-year curse. Sorry if it was more or less there, Cubs fans. Like, I've been very blessed to see those sort of stories unfold, but there was nothing like this, and no one could have seen it coming Halloween weekend in London.
Yeah, it's funny though that you mentioned it because the Broncos and the Jags in like you go back to that 96 season. I'm a Broncos fan, and that ends up leading to the Broncos revenge tour in 97, 98. And then obviously last year a sliding doors moment because if the Jags had won that game, Nathaniel Hackett would have been fired. Who knows where things end up? I suppose just kind of digging maybe a little bit further into Dougie, because with the way things kind of ended in Philadelphia, you'd have to say, I mean, it's kind of worked out for Howie, it's worked out for Dougie. Yep. It hasn't worked out for Carson Wentz so much, but
he was really the villain in all of it. No one knew that script.
Evidently, but I suppose when Doug went to Jacksonville, I've seen people kind of put it down despite what the Eagles did. People kind of said, oh, they looked into, as if you can look into winning a Super Bowl, but he still had a lot to prove. And, he does seem like that even keel character, but you've gotten to see him, I suppose, up close and what he's like around the players. I'm just trying to get a sense for people on this side of the Atlantic. Tell us a bit about Dougie.
Yeah, I have a very unique relationship with Doug, as I am the only daily female member of our media contingent, and I'm also the third youngest of our reporters. And so a lot of times, like, he'll just like, if somebody asks a question that's like off base, let's say, because I'm the one who asks the questions that are off the beaten path and he laughs about those, he'll just always like look at me and I'm like, I don't know. That never happened with Urban. Even my boy Doug Marrone, who I love, that didn't happen. Doug Peterson, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but he has said this to us. He looks at this. He wants to win. He wants to bring a Super Bowl to Jacksonville. But compared to what he went through in Philadelphia, and I could say this being from central New Jersey, center point between New York and Philadelphia, the craziness of their media contingent, he looks at us and he's like, this is like an early retirement, because he's like, really? You don't have any other like hard hitting? You're going to ask my blood type and where my wife's birth certificate is questions? And no, that's just not the nature of Jacksonville's media contingent. And obviously we ask the tough questions when they need to be asked, but Doug is willing to answer those tough questions. And that has been a breath of fresh air for us. Doug is the type that I will tell you, there are a lot of friends I have around town that have run into him and his wife at restaurants. And I know one of my, one who's actually a client of 1010, and he works with us with our pregame show. He and his wife were having dinner and the couple next to them leans over and says, "Ooh, what are you having? Where is that on the menu?" And it was Doug Peterson. And then they had a delightful conversation. I also know Doug was hesitant to go to the Players Championship from some of the players I talked to, because he doesn't want to make it all about him. He doesn't want selfies at TPC Sawgrass and people screaming Dougie. He likes watching golf from his house and he likes watching it on TV. I said it when he was hired, and as the Jaguars started out 2-1, the bar was down here. Like, the bar was just being normal, and Doug obviously succeeded in getting over that bar. But I think what's been really, I would think, validating for him, because you alluded to the Howie validation, Howie's getting to run Philly how he wanted to, and great for Howie. And they went to a Super Bowl, and Jalen Hurts, I believe, is the real deal. He's done a great job of rebuilding that team while also keeping its nucleus intact. But Doug and him really butted heads, at least from what I've been told from reporters who were up there at the time when Doug was relieved of his duties. Doug wanted to hire his staff as he wanted to build it. And Howie said, no, you need to hire this guy, this guy. You can't be hiring these young kids like a Press Taylor. And Doug said, no, if I can't hire them, then I'm out. And so he was out. And for him to come to Jacksonville and to hire two first-time coordinators in Press Taylor and Mike Caldwell, and to succeed like they did, to still surround them with veteran coaches, but to bring in these young minds just like he did in Philadelphia and to succeed, yeah, like they are both winning. The only one who's not winning is Carson Wentz. And I think for Doug, there is some validation. And also the fact that, and this is, of course, the big elephant in the room anytime you have me on the air, the fact that everyone and their mother hated on Trent Baalke, the Jaguars general manager, all last offseason. And Doug was the one person, because I can confirm in talking to people, there were a lot of head coaching candidates that were leery about taking the job because of everything they had heard about Trent Baalke. And Doug took the job, and whether that was because he felt he could overpower Trent or whether he truly felt because of his good-natured, good-intentioned demeanor, he could finally see eye to eye with him, and he would be the one to finally get that olive branch across. He did it. And I think that may be his biggest success of all, somehow, some way. And while winning cures everything, you go back to training camp. There was a moment that they captured when they mic'd up Doug in practice where Trent's walking around all like sullen like this. And Doug walks over and he goes, Trent Baalke, everyone, general manager, wave to the cameras. Wave to the cameras, everyone. And Trent just like kind of like nervously like waves, and he just like pats him on the back. And I remember seeing that and being like, that's who Doug is. He's not doing it for show. He just truly wants to get someone out of their shell, and he clearly got the Jaguars out of their losing shell.
Absolutely. I one of my first ever times in the United States, 17, was spending time on a Habitat for Humanity project in Philly. I loved it. I will always have a special place in my heart, but I don't think there is any place that exists in the world like Philly and like the Philly media. So I can imagine why he describes it as, a little bit more laid back. I am interested, you have been generous with your time. I don't want to eat too much, but before you go, because talked obviously about the Jags being favorites, but looking around at, I suppose, the AFC South rivals, because obviously you've got new quarterbacks in place in two of them, and the Titans in a kind of a strange situation where, if we go back a couple of years, right, to mid-November, and I think the Titans were 8-2 and had beaten the Rams the year the Rams won the Super Bowl. I mean, they were atop everything. And obviously they even went into the playoffs as the number one seed. Ultimately, there were a minute and the bad turnover, talk about sliding doors moments. But since then, safe to say things haven't really gone their way. They're now brought in Will Levis. The expectation is this is kind of the last season for Tannehill, Henry. They're rebuilding and all that. Chris Ballard had to roll the dice. I like what he did in Anthony Richardson because I think his ceiling is there. And in terms of the Texans, well, it's going to be interesting. I cannot believe how they treated their last two head coaches, but they now appear to be happy with their head coach. They appear to be very happy with their draft. But when you are sitting as somebody who covers the Jags, looking out at the rest of the division, what is your take on it?
Well, I loved as you ran through all those. There is a weird Northeast Florida, Duval County connection to each of those teams. Let's start with Tennessee because they obviously finished in second, so we'll go in chronological order. Derrick Henry is from Yulee, the suburb right outside of Jacksonville. And so I think people in Jacksonville, as much as Jaguar fans are not too fond of him bulldozing his way in his 99-yard touchdown runs against their Big Cats, there is always going to be a soft spot for him. I think there is also always going to be a level of admiration for what Mike Vrabel has done, even if they won't admit it, because for everyone else to say playing great defense and having a good running back, that is no longer applicable in the National Football League. And for Mike Vrabel to say bet and push against the grain and do it year in and year out, is nothing short of amazing. I'll tell you this, like we had a conversation with Trent Baalke. It was an off the record conversation, but I feel I could at least share this part in the midway through last season. And we asked about the landscape of the South, and he said, without missing a beat, I won't ever count out Mike Vrabel. I will never count him out. And Mike Vrabel only became the head coach of the Titans in 2017, 2018. That's some pretty high praise for, it's not like he's Bill Belichick that you're not counting him out. And so, yes, I think when I look at the Titans, nothing makes sense. Everything points to the fact that they have a new GM and Mike Vrabel. I mean, is he a lame duck? What exactly is going on here? Ryan Tannehill is definitely a lame duck. Derrick Henry only has a handful of years left on his contract. How much does he have left in the tank? Obviously, his injuries in that season in which they were the number one overall seed didn't hamper them. Last year, when they relied so heavily on him, it did probably hamper his production a bit. And so everything on paper says they shouldn't be competitive and they should be tanking for Caleb Williams. I won't count out Mike Vrabel. I think the Titans will still be there in the end. Who their quarterback is, that remains to be seen. Speaking of quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson, not only from Gainesville originally and played at the University of Florida here locally, his quarterback trainer works with me at 1010XL, good buddy of mine, Denny Thompson. And so I've been around Anthony since he was in high school. And so when they announced his name at the Jaguars draft party with all our fans, it was a very unique situation because people wanted to cheer, especially the Gator Jaguar fans. But also you're like, my gosh, he's going to the Colts. And just like all of you, it's high ceiling, low floor. It's a high risk, high reward. Like, it really, I think that Shane Steichen, which I will say this, and I feel comfortable saying this on the record, Shane Steichen worked with Jalen Hurts, similar-ish skill set to Anthony. He also worked with Gardner Minshew, who trains with Anthony Richardson, with Denny Thompson here locally. And so the Colts were a pairing that I know Anthony's camp was very happy with, even though it might mean old buddy Gardner Minshew may not be the day one starter like he hoped to be. And that's the million-dollar question. Are you going to give him time to develop, or are you going to say he was the number 4 overall pick? He needs to start. Which for Jaguar fans is a good thing because you face him week 1. So it'd be his first NFL game. So either he lights it up or he has no idea what's happening and he can't read an NFL defense. And then you play him again week 6. And so you either see Gardner Minshew or you see an Anthony Richardson that, yes, the league hasn't seen, but he also hasn't seen the league. And then finally with the Texans, I jokingly call them the island of misfit Jaguars because you can just like go down the list. Like we joked about this on the air. It all started with Baselli. I'm blaming Baselli in the expansion draft that you've got Chris Conley, AJ Cann, Shaq Griffin now, George Warhop, Jalen Camp. The list goes on of Jaguar rejects that ended up in Houston. And I think that's similar to what the Jaguars are doing with the bottom half of their roster this year. You're starting to see the Texans in the years to come head towards that same model because they're going to have their quarterback, presumably, in CJ Stroud. They have a couple big marquee pieces, whether, that's along their offensive line or in Will Anderson on the defensive front. Don't forget the fact that they got Derek Stingley last year, who I think is a pretty darn good corner, and he actually had a similar pick of Trevor, just like Justin Simmons did on the goal line here in Duval County last year. And so there are pieces there. I think D'Amico Ryans is going to be a great coach, namely because of his proximity to Kyle Shanahan, and everything Kyle Shanahan touches tends to turn to gold. So therefore, I think that they will be more competitive, but I think like the Jags are experiencing where they're trying to get that bottom third of the roster to be just as competitive as the top third, the Texans are going to be going through those growing pains in year 1 under D'Amico. And so I wouldn't expect them to be world beaters, but also who expected the Jaguars to be playing in the divisional round against the Chiefs. And for what it's worth, up until that fumble, looking like they could give the Chiefs a ball game with 5 minutes left at Arrowhead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the Jags went in, nobody really gave them a prayer, and they more than performed. So it will be very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see the division. I mean, we saw it, say, with the NFC East, where, we went from the laughingstock, NFC least to NFC East. And if Anthony Richardson hits, if D'Amico is as good as I think he can be, an incredible coach, and we will have to see. I mean, for the Titans, I rate Mike Vrabel. I get why Trent Baalke said that. I mean, I will forever, as long as I live, laugh when I think back to Vrabel annoying Belichick with his own tactics.
I mean, hey, the weird handshake, what proved to be Urban Meyer's final game with the Jaguars. I mean, there's stories that I've heard from what happened at Ohio State when Vrabel was on the staff there with Urban, that there was some unfinished conversations that were, unspoken in that handshake. Insane.
I wouldn't finish conversations with Mike Vrabel. I would hold my tongue, definitely.
Urban didn't. Apparently, it didn't end too well in the Ohio State.
Wouldn't imagine it would. Mike Vrabel is capable on and off the field. I would imagine. Mia, you are a joy to talk to. For listeners who want to check out more of your stuff, where can they do that?
Absolutely. So you can check me out on Twitter at Mia O'Brien TV, MIAOBRIEN TV, no apostrophe. You also, of course, get me Monday through Friday, 12 to 3 Eastern on XL Primetime, 1010XL. Like I said off the top, you could check us out on our app. There's a 1010XL and a 92.5 FM app. So either app works, as well as our website. And we also are live streaming on YouTube now. So you also can listen to the full show and all of our 14 hours of daily programming over there on our 1010XL live cam. And you can also check me out on Instagram, Mobrian_16, trying to get better about posting there. And then 1010XL Jax is our Instagram over there. And we post a ton of stuff there. And we've got some exciting video projects that I just confirmed this morning in the works for this summer that you guys are going to want to check out.
I like that. Just tease that, tantalize that out there. We'll make sure to put those into the show notes. But Mia O'Brien, hopefully have you back on again made up the lead up to the new season. But thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.